I adore JoJo. It's along with Dragon Ball as a franchise that I do not shut up about. I'm the jackass who won't stop recommending it to people to the detriment of all of my friendships. I always complain that One Piece fans won't shut up, but then I'll turn around and beg them to watch this instead. Every part has something enjoyable about it, even the ones I'm not as in love with. The art style is incredible, and the fights, oh man, the fights. From part 2 onwards, the series goes nuts with creative fights one after another, and once stands come into play, the author, Hirohiko Araki, really gets unleashed, and the series truly becomes uncomparable to anything else. It is to this day some of the most fresh and original battle shonen that I have ever experienced. However, JoJo is incredibly hard to adapt. Its art style is so expressive and so detailed that recreating it in motion is damn near impossible to do right. Now, obviously the anime adaptation by David Production is fantastic. For most of the series, I think it's actually an improvement, making certain moments a bit less confusing and stand battles easier to follow. However, that anime wasn't made until 2012. Well over 20 years after the manga had taken off. Yes, there was an OVA and a lost movie, but they didn't capture the same energy of the manga. They're really their own things. In fact, I don't think a lot of media outside the anime has captured its style completely either. But that hasn't stopped anyone from trying, because despite the fact that it lacked an anime for so long, it's always had quite a few games to its name, even before the anime. I think Eyes of Heaven nails the spirit and style of JoJo, and of course Heritage for the Future is a fantastic fighting game that will probably get a video after my MVC retrospective is done, even though I cannot understand it for the life of me. I'm personally currently in love with All-Star Battle R. It brings the style of Eyes of Heaven, but with a fantastic fighting game along with it. I'm serious, this game is so untapped it hurts. Plus, I think it's better as a JoJo representation than Heritage is. But, of course, this video is focused on a very specific game, not a fighting game. In fact, it's more of a boss rush beat-em-up, and that, of course, is the game based on JoJo Part 5, titled JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Vento Oreo. Or at least it was called that until it got translated recently. Now it's called Golden Wind, just like the anime. Now, this is one of 2 PS2 JoJo games that, of course, the US didn't get. I don't know shit about the Phantom Blood one, maybe another time. But I've heard a lot about the Part 5 game. Like, for example, it exists. Giorno is voiced by a girl. That's about it. It was always a piece of JoJo history, of course, and it was the first time that Part 5 really got adapted into a non-manga medium. And hey, Part 5 is my favorite part. I love the character-focused drama, Bruno is my favorite JoJo character, and Purple Haze is probably my favorite stand in the series. And it's got a great middle point of far enough from Part 3 that stands get more complicated, but not yet to 6 where they get a bit too confusing or weird at times. Seriously, I'm not going to talk too detailed about the story, as it's just Part 5, and I'm going to assume that you've read or watched it, but if you haven't, please go watch it before watching this. But that's your final warning, so let's dig in. Now, because of this game structure, I feel it's fair to go over each of the fights one by one, as it's really just a boss rush with a very simple combat system. But first, I want to talk general opinions on the gameplay and the presentation. I like it. Now, gameplay can be both character and arena dependent, but as an adaptation of stand fights, it works. Every enemy has a different strategy, from keeping a distance to AoE, to making me wish I was buried in the goddamn ground. The camera can be a bitch, but for the most part, it feels like a puzzle, where you need to figure out how to get in and rush the fuck out of your opponent. And I have to say, stand rushes in this game feel damn good. They chunk the boss, they knock them down, and they tend to affect the arena itself a lot of the time. Along with that, each stand has a special ability, from Giorno growing trees, to Bruno throwing his fist, to a Bacchio. Yeah. And finally, there's different hidden requirements that will earn you more health and stand power. Usually these are earned by following what happened in the manga. Anything from shooting Bucciarati to shooting Bucciarati. Sometimes you even get full cutscenes or end the fight super early. It's simple, it's very unique, and the game is very short, so it never really gets old. Visually, okay, look. Yes, it doesn't look incredible, but considering it's trying to stand out and replicate JoJo, I think it looks decent. Not everything looks great. But I really have soft spots for these models. They use character designs and colors based on Araki's different colorations, which of course are never consistent. So a lot of them look different than what we got in the anime. Also, if you're really gonna tell me that I'm wrong for loving these old PS2 and GameCube graphics, then you are definitely not invited to my birthday party anymore, because you served my feet. Now then, let's really get started. Now, this game does skip some fights, which we'll touch on more later, but to start, you don't get to fight the legendary battle between Giorno and Leaky Eye Luca. Devastating. Instead, your first fight is Bucciarati. This is an incredibly simple fight for the first phase, where you basically just bully Bruno on the train like it's a drunken brawl. After the tutorial portion, the fight goes onto the streets where Bucciarati will teleport around to avoid you. And this is when you realize that the town is full of random people not worthy of mercy, and they're probably all stand users, so you might as well give them the old razzle-dazzle. Very simple, but it's a good teaching lesson on how to work with distance and also how the camera can be really annoying. Next is Black Sabbath. This fight is so cool. It's exactly what I want out of a game like this. Very accurately, Black Sabbath can't leave the shadows without taking heavy damage, so your goal is to avoid his attacks, then rush him, knocking him into the sun. But anything casting a shadow can help him move, like the pillars or the birds, so knowing where he could show up to hit him hard is the main goal. Plus, this one's on a constant timer because the sun will go down soon. Once you figure it out, it's very easy to cheese, but like I said, it's more of a puzzle than a fight, which makes sense for this series. The game then skips Soft Machine and Kraftwerk. If anything, it just makes the story more awkward, because instead of needing to claim Polpo's money, Bruno basically just says that it's his now, and then the old mafioso comes out of nowhere like, "Yes, correct, Bucciarati. This is Trish, she's your mission. Bye-bye." Next up is Little Feat, and I am shocked that they skipped Kraftwerks but wanting to do the Little Feat fight, because I feel like both are equally hard to adapt into a game. And this is probably the easiest fight in the entire game. He'll shrink and hide with rats and such, but because you're Narancia using Aerosmith, you have an insane range advantage. If he does manage to shrink you, you are going to take very, very heavy damage, but that's only if he lands a hit. And he's so easy to lock down that I never really struggled with him. What's sad though is this is Narancia's only fight outside of bonus modes, which is pretty disappointing because he's very fleshed out and fun. Speaking of fights where you only play as a character once, Man in the Mirror. I love this fight in the manga and the show. It's so tense and it features Purple Haze, which like I said, might be my favorite stand in the series. Too bad in this game, it is arguably the absolute worst fight. It takes place over 3 phases and none of them are fun. If anything, they just tend to be fucking annoying. When you're in the mirror, your controls are also mirrored, but to make it even more frustrating, only left and right are reversed. Up and down are still the same, so it becomes incredibly frustrating just to move around. Not only that, but Aluso will just sit and juggle you and attack you from off screen because the camera here is straight awful. The first section is just Fugo trying to avoid his bullshit for 2 minutes, which I ended up cheesing just by locking him in the corner with this generic 3-hit combo. But then it gets even worse, as then you play as a Bacchio, who is just not fun to play. He can't combo, the arena is even tinier, which means more bullshit pot shots and juggles. I just wanted it to end the whole time. And Moody Blues, I have no idea what its deal is. The next part's a little better, as it's back to Fugo and Purple Haze can lock him into grabs and knock his teeth in. But the controls and camera still just take away any fun this fight could have had. Fuck this fight. I never want to play it again. But it's followed up by Grateful Dead and Beach Boy, and my faith has been restored because these fights are great. The first phase is centered around getting ice from the ice machine to avoid Grateful Dead's aging. Well, he basically won't outright attack at first, instead trying to block your way across the room where you need to save Coco Jumbo. Or you can fight him, which is pretty fun, as Sticky Fingers has both ranged and close-up options. Or you could just hit the wall, make a zipper, and then yeet him out like a Chad. Then it's followed by Beach Boy. Pretty simple, but learning to avoid the rod's range while also landing consistent hits and making sure Grateful Dead doesn't come out again keeps it dynamic and fun. If my puzzle analogy hasn't already been run into the ground, I think this fight digs that hole even deeper in proving my point. The Babyface fight is skipped. Though it could have reasonably worked, I don't feel that broken up about it being gone, as Babyface as a stand really grosses me out. Demolto. Of course, next up is White Album. At the start of this fight, while it's cool to be fighting him on the car, it's a little dull, and I don't really know if I was even fighting him correctly. However, the fight after is pretty great. He's constantly moving, and he doesn't take damage from the front. He rarely will go full force after you, and he does his best to be hard to hit. Sex Pistols is also one of the more complicated stands to use, and I still don't know if I've really mastered its gameplay style. He can also use Gently Weeps, and yes, you can shoot yourself to death when it's active, but you can also turn the lampposts into skewers and go to town with insanely heavy damage. It's one of the most accurate to the the manga fights in the game, even including Giorno giving Mista the slop top 3000. Next is the first fight with King Crimson, which is short and brutal, with Trish laying near dead on the ground and the music being frantic. The boss teleports around, attacking quickly and violently. Your only goal is to survive for 1 minute, then leave. Less time than with Man in the Mirror, but it feels so much more intense and dangerous. Then you just have to take a tiny sliver of his health, but he's so fast and his attacks are so devastating that even that feels like a tall order. One of the game's best moments. I have to say real quick that the adaptation of the group turning traitor is done actually very well. It's plenty emotional, the acting is solid, and kudos to the fan translation. It hits me just as hard as ever. However, I also realize we don't really get a lot of character work in this game. We don't get their backstories like we do in the manga, so if you're using this game as a first experience of Part 5, which you obviously shouldn't, it kind of falls flat in that area. Anyway, Clash and Talking Head are skipped. Which, Talking Head, sure, I don't think you could base a fight in a game like this off of just lying. But I don't know, I think a fight with Clash could have acted as a better Man in the Mirror fight. Oh well, I like Squallow and Tizano, and I'm glad I didn't have to kill them. The Notorious B.I.G. fight is a bit mixed and kind of disappointing. The first part is just dull and frustrating, as you have to barely inch your way towards the brooch it's guarding, and it takes forever. Not only that, but I can't tell for the life of me when it's guaranteed he'll attack or when he'll just change his mind. Also, the camera is such a pain because the closer you get to the brooch, the less you actually see him. Then once you do get the brooch, you get access to Spice Girl, and the fight is an absolute cakewalk. You can distract him with the seats and then freely wail on him with no repercussion. Then the final part sucks. His attacks are way too annoying to predict, he does way too much damage, and you constantly have to hit him to push him back. But when you hit him, it's likely he'll just hit you for tons of damage back because none of his animations have real wind up, and it's way too long. Overall, not a huge fan of this one, which sucks because I really liked this as the one time you get to play as Trish and you Spice Girl. I wish you got another chance other than this fight. Very unfortunately, the game skips the Metallica fight. It's one of the most terrifying stands and one of the best fights in the series, and it's just not playable. And that sucks because I would have loved to play as Doppio trying to fight against him. It still happens in cutscene form, but the fight itself doesn't really matter. Oh well. At least Risotto got his justice in All-Star Battle R, and Doppio is still here at least. On to Oasis and Green Day, with the boys Secco and Choco. What did they do? I get that Chocolata is supposed to look creepy, but what the fuck? He just looks like a voodoo doll was human-sized. All the models look decent, but this is just... Anyway, the first phase against Oasis is a bit trial and error as he can come out of the ground very suddenly, but his goal isn't actually to kill you, it's to knock you down so Green Day's mold the slow burn damage as you slowly try to get back up. I actually managed to cheese it and Secco knocked me across the way like a shortcut, which was very nice. Overall, it's not an awful escape phase and it adapts the desperation of the scene very well, even if it's hard to predict. Green Day is actually pretty interesting, from a design standpoint specifically. Because this was before Araki ever actually showed the bottom half of the stand, the game designers interpreted it as slime, where the anime interpreted it as legs. The fight itself is decent too. Green Day spreads the mold while Chocolata attacks you up close and cuts himself apart to attack from range. If I'm being honest, it's pretty easy as he doesn't have nearly the amount of attack options a lot of other bosses do, but it's not bad. It's solid. Now, the true Oasis fight is interesting. He can juggle you and hit you really hard, but if you do things like pop car tires while he's underground or just stand still and make no sound at all, he has trouble tracking you and his attacks will get more erratic and easy to punish. It can be really difficult, but it never really felt unfair to me, especially since you can give yourself the advantage and punish accordingly. But now that that's over, the game already enters its final chapter. And of course, Polnareff shows up with the stand arrow. And then my jaw hit the floor. The game now introduces its final playable character, Polnareff in his wheelchair. You just have to chunk a bit of Diavolo's health, but he hits like a freight train and you feel so vulnerable. You feel so up against the wall, but the fight and dialogue are so good until he decides to use time skip. Now, I don't know if you guys know how King Crimson works, but you should at least know that Diavolo can't attack in skip time. He literally can just get free hits on you when you're already at a disadvantage, and even worse, it has no cooldown. If he wants, he can just spam this over and over until you're dead. It just sucks so much because the fight is so good outside of that. He's so much stronger than you, but your goal is just to get a tiny sliver off of him. I just wish you didn't have an I win button that you can't even avoid. Is the implication that he was guaranteed to beat the shit out of me, so the skip time just has him beating the shit out of me during it? Chariot Requiem is fun, but it can also be pretty frustrating. Chariot has a clone of Sticky Fingers at almost all times, so you have to try to attack Chariot while not getting cheap shotted mid-attack. I also found that if you stand rest Chariot and then spam dodges, you can wail on him pretty easily, and you can get some heavy damage in. It keeps walking, and its main goal is to reach the exit, so once you figure out a strategy to not get pot-shotted over and over again, it's just a matter of holding him still while landing hits. It's not bad, but it's kinda clunky. Then, after a lot of cutscenes, and admittedly a really cool one when Jorno gets the arrow, you get to use Gold Experience Requiem. It doesn't change a ton about Jorno's playstyle, but it's still really cool to use. The fight against Diavolo is mostly the same as it was with Polnareff, including the time skip spam. But what's actually insanely sick is that while Jorno has trouble moving in skip time, Gold Experience does not. So if you have Gold Experience out when he skips, you just get to wail on him for free. And if he gets spammy with it, you win. It's a solid fight to end the game, but I can't say it's not a little anticlimactic, as it isn't too different from every other stand fight. But that's it. The game has the normal Part 5 ending, which in terms of JoJo isn't one of my favorite endings, but it's satisfying enough, which is basically what I can say for the game itself. It's satisfying enough. With how short it is, it's really hard to get sick of, even with its speed bumps. It's very clear that despite everything that it struggles with, there's an obvious passion for Golden Wind that the developers had. From the cutscenes to the comic style in-betweens to the loading screens, which are manga covers, it's clear they really love JoJo's. It's just that as a game, I think its novelty is just that it exists. Not really that it's a fantastic game. It's a licensed game from a time where licensed games got smaller budgets and less time put into them. And despite its quality, it's obvious that it was a budget title. I don't know. I liked it, but I probably won't need to go back to it ever again. As the first non-manga adaptation of Part 5, it is a very unique piece of history, but as a game now, it's not really an insane thing. It's worth more as to what it means to the series as a whole than to how it plays as a video game. If you're a fan of JoJo, especially Part 5 like me, I think it's worth giving it a look, but don't expect it to be more than what it is. And hey, if you collect JoJo stuff, a copy of the game that you won't be able to play because of PS2 region locks is only around 25 bucks right now, and it's a nice shelf piece. Now, I'm going to use a JoJo reference and never come back.